Welcome aboard. Please mind the closing doors.
Look at the sky, son.
I know, it's beautiful.
The colony that forgot fear. Before we begin, drop a quick HI in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Now, year 3862. On the edge of human space, nearly 4,000 light-years from Earth, sat a colony called Arendor Prime. It wasn't famous, it wasn't rich, and it certainly wasn't important enough to appear on most star maps. But for the 31,000 people who lived there, it was home. Every morning, cargo haulers lifted from the mining districts. Children filled school corridors. Families gathered in market plazas. Life was simple, predictable, peaceful, and that was exactly the problem. Because peace has a dangerous habit of making people forget. 10 years earlier, entire human colonies had vanished from the frontier. The attackers were known by one name, the Krill. No one knew where they came from. No one knew how old their civilization was. All anyone knew was what happened when their ships appeared. People disappeared, entire populations vanished, and the colonies that survived never looked the same afterward. But Arendor Prime had never seen the Krill. The younger generation only knew them as stories. Ghost stories told by old veterans in frontier bars. Warnings repeated by parents. Historical documentaries. Nothing more. Most people believed the danger had passed. They were wrong, because millions of kilometers away, something was already moving toward them through the darkness. And it had been watching for a very long time. The signal from the dark, at 2:14 colony time, the orbital communications station received a transmission. The message lasted 11 seconds. Static, heavy breathing, metal scraping somewhere in the background. Then a terrified voice. They found us. Static. They're inside the walls. Silence. The transmission ended. The station operators immediately tried responding. Nothing. No answer. No return signal. No emergency beacon. Just darkness. Within minutes, the message reached Commander Elias Varn, aboard the patrol cruiser Ardent. The moment he heard the recording, a cold feeling settled into his chest, because he had heard that kind of fear before. At Talros Station, at New Horizon Colony, at places that no longer existed. The bridge remained silent while the audio played. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Everyone knew exactly what it meant. The Krill were back. Varn walked toward the main display. Show me the source. A star map appeared, then a blinking red marker. The signal came from an abandoned research station near Arendor Prime, a station that had officially been empty for 20 years. Slowly, Varn looked toward the officers around him and asked the question nobody wanted answered. If that station was abandoned, he paused. Then who sent the message? The bridge fell silent, because somewhere out there, someone was still alive, and something was hunting them. To be continued. Yet somehow, someone had transmitted a distress signal from inside it. How long to intercept? Varn asked. Lieutenant Mira Solis checked navigation data. 6 hours at maximum burn. Varn nodded. Set course. The cruiser Ardent turned silently toward the outer system. Outside the observation windows, stars stretched into glowing lines as the ship accelerated. Nobody on the bridge said much, because everyone knew what they were probably heading toward. A graveyard. 6 hours later, Research Station K-47 appeared on sensors. The station floated alone in darkness above a frozen moon. At first glance, everything looked normal. No visible damage, no signs of combat, no emergency beacons, no life signs, nothing, and somehow, that felt wrong. Very wrong. Bring us closer, Varn ordered. The cruiser moved carefully toward the station. Long-range scanners swept across the structure. Still nothing. No movement, no heat signatures, no communications. Just silence. The station looked dead. Yet somebody had called for help. Mira frowned at her console. Commander, what is it? We found something. The tactical display zoomed inward. A docking bay. One of the outer airlocks had been forced open from the inside. Not outside. Inside. Varn felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever happened here, the people had been trying to escape. 30 minutes later, a boarding team entered the station. The corridors were dark. Emergency lights flickered weakly overhead. Dust covered everything. The air smelled stale, abandoned, The team advanced slowly through the main corridor, weapons raised, helmet cameras streaming directly to the Ardent. Varn watched from the bridge. Every step echoed through empty hallways. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Then one Marine stopped suddenly. "Sir, what is it?" The Marine aimed his flashlight downward. Scratches. Thousands of scratches. Deep grooves carved into the floor panels, like something heavy had been dragged through the corridor. For a very long distance, the team continued forward. The scratches continued too. Around corners, past laboratories, through storage sections, always heading deeper, as if something had been collected, moved, taken somewhere. Nobody liked that thought. The trail ended at Laboratory 7. The blast door stood partially open. One Marine carefully pushed it wider, then froze. Inside the room, every surface was covered in writing. Walls, tables, windows, ceilings, hundreds of desperate messages scratched into metal. Some written in marker, some carved with tools, some apparently written using blood. The Marines stood silently. One sentence appeared again and again. "They are learning." Another message, "Do not let them reach Arendor Prime." Then another, written larger than all the rest, "We were never the target." The bridge aboard the Ardent fell completely silent. Varn stared at the words. Slowly, very slowly, he began understanding what he was looking at. The station hadn't been attacked. The people here had discovered something terrifying enough to drive them insane. Then the motion alarms activated. Every Marine turned instantly. Movement, deep inside the station. Fast, very fast. One contact, then 3, then 7. The sensors struggled to track them. The shapes moved through ventilation systems and maintenance shafts at impossible speeds. "Contact," a Marine shouted. Gunfire erupted. The corridor exploded with flashing light. The bridge watched through helmet cameras as dark figures darted through the shadows. Too fast to identify, too fast to target. One Marine disappeared around a corner. His scream lasted less than 2 seconds. Then silence, absolute silence. The remaining team fell back immediately. Whatever was inside K-47, it wasn't human. The thing in the ventilation shafts. The survivors regrouped inside a security checkpoint. Heavy blast doors sealed shut behind them. Breathing echoed through helmets. Nobody spoke. Everyone had seen it. Nobody understood it. The creature never stayed visible long enough. Just flashes, movement, dark shapes, then death. One Marine checked ammunition. "Commander," Varn's voice came through the comms. "Report." The Marine hesitated, then answered honestly. "We're not alone." Outside the checkpoint, something moved. A scratching sound. Slow, methodical. The Marines aimed toward the sealed door. Nothing happened. Then the scratching moved across the ceiling. Then the wall. Then somewhere underneath the floor. As if the creature wasn't walking. As if it was crawling through the station itself. Listening, waiting, hunting. Back on the bridge, Mira suddenly looked up from her scanner. Her face had gone pale. "Commander." "What?" "I found archived files." "From the station?" She nodded slowly. "Research logs?" Varn walked toward her console. "What were they studying?" Mira opened the files. The answer appeared on screen. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Varn whispered, "Oh no." The station hadn't been researching mining technology, or medicine, or energy production. They had been studying recovered krill technology, fragments collected from destroyed frontier colonies, artifacts left behind after harvest operations. And according to the final logs, they succeeded. The scientists activated one of the devices 3 weeks ago. After that, communication with the station stopped. On the screen appeared the final recorded message from the lead scientist. The woman looked exhausted, terrified. She kept glancing over her shoulder while speaking. "We made contact." Varn felt his stomach tighten. The scientist continued. "We thought the device was a navigation system." She laughed nervously. Then tears appeared in her eyes. "It wasn't." Static filled the recording. "We didn't call the krill." Another glance behind her. Another terrified pause. Then the final words. "We called something the krill are afraid of." The recording ended. The bridge became silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because if the krill feared it, What exactly had the scientists awakened? At that exact moment, every alarm aboard the Ardent activated. Red lights flooded the bridge. Mira looked at the sensor screen, then froze. Multiple jump signatures, dozens of them, appearing at the edge of the system. Varn stepped toward the display. His face hardened immediately. The Krill had arrived. Not one ship, not two, an entire fleet, and they were heading directly toward Arendor Prime. But something else appeared behind them, something much larger, something even the Krill seemed to be running from. And for the first time in years, Commander Elias Varn felt genuine fear. The enemy of the Krill. Before we continue, comment below. Fear follows everyone, because tonight, humanity is about to discover that even monsters have nightmares. The bridge of the Ardent was silent, not the ordinary silence of disciplined soldiers, the kind of silence that appears when people see something they cannot explain. Commander Elias Varn stared at the tactical display. The Krill fleet had entered the system. 12 ships, 2 command vessels, multiple suppression platforms, enough firepower to erase Arendor Prime completely. But none of that held his attention. Something else did. The object behind them, the thing the Krill seemed desperate to outrun. At first it appeared as a sensor distortion. Then the scanners recalibrated. The bridge lights dimmed automatically as the image expanded. Nobody spoke. The object wasn't a ship. Not exactly. Ships were built, designed, engineered. This thing looked grown. A colossal structure nearly 40 kilometers long drifted through space behind the Krill fleet. Its surface appeared organic and metallic at the same time. Black tendrils wrapped around massive skeletal frameworks that glowed faintly beneath the darkness. No visible engines, no visible weapons, no obvious purpose, yet every sensor aboard the Ardent screamed warnings. Unknown energy signatures, unknown materials, unknown life forms. Everything about it was wrong. Mira swallowed hard. What is that? Nobody answered, because nobody knew. Then something even stranger happened. The Krill fleet changed formation. Immediately, abruptly, without hesitation. Instead of advancing toward Arendor Prime, they accelerated, running. Commander Varn stared at the display. The realization felt impossible. The Krill weren't attacking. They were retreating. Confirm that? Mira checked the readings twice, then 3 times. Her voice became quieter. They're definitely retreating. One officer actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it made no sense. The Krill never retreated. Entire frontier military academies taught that fact. Krill commanders withdrew only when operations ended, never because of fear. Yet the sensor data showed exactly that. Fear, pure fear. Suddenly a transmission appeared. Not from the Krill, not from Arendor Prime, from the giant object itself. Every communications system aboard the cruiser activated simultaneously. Screens flickered, audio channels opened. Then a voice emerged. Slow, deep, ancient, not mechanical, not biological, something in between. The words arrived in perfect human language. They have returned. Nobody moved. The voice continued. The children of Earth still live. Varn felt every hair on his arm stand up. The thing knew humanity. Then the transmission ended. Just like that. Silence returned. Nobody spoke for nearly 20 seconds. Finally, Mira whispered, "Did that thing just recognize us?" Commander Varn didn't answer, because he was already looking at something else. A priority alert arriving from Arendor Prime. Emergency civilian channels. The colony had finally noticed the incoming fleet, and panic was beginning. Shadows over Arendor Prime. Arendor Prime had enjoyed peace for too long. The colony wasn't prepared. Not really. People knew evacuation procedures. People attended emergency drills. People watched historical documentaries about frontier attacks. But none of that prepared them for reality. Reality was different. Reality arrived suddenly, without warning, and it was arriving now. Across the colony, emergency sirens activated. Red warning lights illuminated streets and industrial sectors. Cargo traffic halted. Mining operations shut down. Schools entered lockdown. Families rushed toward shelters. Thousands of people looked up at the night sky and saw ships, dozens of them, tiny black shapes descending through the atmosphere. Hut. In the central mining district, 24-year-old Cale Arden stood outside processing facility 3. He had just finished a 14-hour maintenance shift. His hands still smelled like coolant fluid and machine oil. Normally, he would have gone home. Instead, he found himself staring upward. At warships, his younger sister Lana stepped beside him. "What do we do?" Kyle didn't answer immediately, because honestly, he had no idea. Most frontier citizens spent their entire lives hearing stories about invasion. Very few expected to actually live through one. Cale finally looked toward the emergency broadcasts, appearing on giant public displays. A familiar face appeared, Governor Rhea Callis, trying her best to remain calm, trying her best to stop 31,000 people from panicking. Not an easy task. Citizens of Arendor Prime, her voice echoed through the district. "We are coordinating with Frontier Defense Forces." A lie. Everyone knew it. The nearest military fleet was days away. People weren't stupid. They understood exactly how alone they were. Then the sky changed. A bright blue flash appeared high above the atmosphere. Then another, and another. Everyone stopped moving. Everyone looked up. The Krill fleet was firing, but not at the colony, at something behind them. The giant object. From the surface, the battle looked unreal. Massive energy beams crossed the darkness above the world. Explosions bloomed like artificial stars. Fragments of burning debris entered the atmosphere, trailing fire. Children stared. Adults stared. Nobody understood what they were seeing. Only one thing was obvious. Something powerful enough to frighten the Krill had arrived, and now it was fighting them. Aboard the Ardent, Commander Varn watched the engagement unfold. The results shocked everyone. The Krill attacks did nothing. Absolutely nothing. Energy weapons struck the giant structure repeatedly. The blasts vanished across its surface, absorbed, consumed, ignored. The enormous object continued moving forward, slowly, relentlessly, as if the attacks didn't even exist. Then it responded. One section of the structure opened. Not mechanically, organically, like an eye opening for the first time. A beam of black light emerged. Not energy, not plasma, something else, something the scanners couldn't classify. The beam touched a Krill destroyer. Only touched it, for less than a second. The ship disappeared, not exploded, not destroyed, gone, completely erased from existence. The bridge fell silent. Again, Mira stared at the tactical display. What kind of weapon does that? Nobody knew, because no known weapon worked like that. The object fired again. Another Krill vessel vanished. Then another. Panic spread through the enemy formation. Actual panic. The impossible was happening. The hunters were becoming prey. That's it. But Commander Varn noticed something nobody else did. The object wasn't pursuing humanity. It wasn't moving toward Arendor Prime. Its attention remained fixed entirely on the Krill, almost as if humanity didn't matter to it, at least not yet. That's it. Then another transmission arrived. The same ancient voice, the same impossible presence. This time only 6 words. 6 words that changed everything. The Krill were created to fight us. The bridge froze. Every person on board stared at the speakers. The message continued. They failed. Static. Silence. Then the transmission ended. That's it. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Because suddenly, the entire history of the frontier looked different. The Krill weren't the ultimate threat. They weren't the oldest civilization. They weren't the monsters at the top of the food chain. They were soldiers, weapons, a failed weapon, and somewhere beyond known space, the enemy they had been built to fight had finally arrived. That's it. Meanwhile, far below the atmosphere, hidden inside an ancient mining tunnel beneath Arendor Prime, something woke up. Deep underground sensors activated for the first time in centuries. A sealed chamber opened. Dust drifted through darkness. Ancient machinery hummed softly, and a single blue light appeared. Watching, waiting, recognizing the arrival of something it had not encountered in thousands of years. That's it. The war above Arendor Prime had only just begun, but the secret beneath the colony was far older than humanity, and far more dangerous. That's it. To be continued. The secret beneath Arendor Prime. Before we begin, comment below. Some secrets should stay buried, because tonight, humanity is about to discover why Arendor Prime was never an ordinary colony. While the battle raged in orbit, nobody on the surface noticed the first tremor. The vibration lasted less than 2 seconds. Most people assumed it was distant orbital impacts. They were wrong. The movement came from deep underground, far below the mines, far below the colony foundations, far below anything humans had ever explored. Something ancient had awakened. Cale Arden felt it immediately. He was helping evacuate workers toward Shelter District 7 when the ground trembled beneath his boots. Lena grabbed his arm. "You felt that too?" Cale nodded. Mining technicians learned to trust vibrations, and that vibration didn't feel natural. It felt mechanical, like an enormous machine turning on after centuries of silence. Several kilometers away, emergency teams received similar reports. Unexplained energy readings, seismic disturbances, power fluctuations. At first, nobody connected them. There were bigger problems. A fleet battle was happening above the planet. The end of civilization seemed slightly more important. But beneath Sector 12, the ancient chamber continued opening. Massive stone-like doors separated slowly. Dust clouds rolled through forgotten corridors. Ancient lights activated one by one. Blue, white, blue, white. The illumination spread deeper into the darkness, revealing something impossible. A city, not a human city, not a krill city, something older, something far older. Entire structures stretched into darkness beyond scanner range. Massive towers, unknown machinery, roadways untouched for thousands of years. An entire civilization hidden beneath Arendor Prime, waiting, sleeping, until now. Elsewhere, aboard the Ardent, Commander Elias Varn was dealing with a different nightmare. The giant alien structure continued dismantling the krill fleet. Methodically, effortlessly, yet Varn wasn't celebrating. Because the more data they gathered, the less comforting the situation became. Mira turned toward him. "Commander, long-range scans are complete." And? She hesitated, then answered, "The object isn't a ship." Varn frowned. "What is it then?" Mira enlarged the scan. The bridge became silent. The object was alive. Not crude, alive. Every sensor confirmed it. Biological systems, energy systems, neural systems. The entire structure was a living organism, 40 kilometers long, older than recorded human history, and currently destroying warships. One officer whispered, "That's impossible." Mira quietly replied, "So was everything else we've seen today." Nobody argued. Then another transmission arrived. The ancient voice again. This time the message was directed specifically at humanity. "Earth descendants." The bridge froze. The voice continued. "The sleepers are awakening." Commander Varn felt his stomach tighten. "Sleepers? What sleepers?" Before anyone could respond, the transmission ended. Again, back on Arendor Prime, things became stranger. Fast, across multiple mining sectors, ancient symbols began appearing on abandoned tunnel walls. Blue glowing patterns. Nobody knew where they came from. Security cameras recorded them forming spontaneously across stone surfaces, as if invisible hands were drawing them. Workers reported hearing voices, not spoken words, whispers, dreams, memories. People began describing identical visions, despite never meeting each other. Ancient cities, stars, machines larger than moons. A war that happened before humanity discovered fire. The colony was beginning to panic, and they hadn't even learned the truth yet. The city of sleepers. Cale didn't believe in ghosts, or prophecies, or ancient legends. He believed in machinery, numbers, things that could be repaired. But tonight, even Cale was struggling to explain what he was seeing. Emergency power failures had trapped dozens of civilians near an old mining access shaft. Cale volunteered to help, mostly because standing still felt impossible. Lena insisted on coming. Against his better judgment, the rescue team descended nearly 2 kilometers underground. Everything seemed normal at first. Dark tunnels, old mining equipment, dust, silence. Then they reached the collapsed shaft and discovered something impossible. The collapse hadn't exposed rock. It had exposed a structure, smooth black metal, perfectly preserved. No corrosion, no damage, no signs of age, as if it had been built yesterday. The rescue team stared in disbelief. One worker reached out carefully. The moment his hand touched the surface, the wall lit up. Blue light spread across the structure. Symbols appeared, patterns, ancient writing. Then the wall opened. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The darkness beyond seemed endless. One rescue worker whispered, "We should report this." Another answered, "We should run." Honestly, both seemed reasonable, but curiosity won. Curiosity usually does, especially with humans. Kale grabbed a flashlight, then stepped through the opening. The others followed. Slowly, carefully, silently, the tunnel beyond stretched deep underground. Perfectly smooth, perfectly preserved, and definitely not human. The deeper they went, the larger it became. Eventually, the tunnel opened into something enormous. The city. Kale stopped walking. Everyone did, because words failed. Completely. Massive towers rose into darkness. Suspended platforms floated above empty streets. Unknown machinery pulsed softly beneath transparent floors. Blue lights illuminated structures larger than entire colony districts. The city seemed frozen in time. Waiting, watching, remembering, Lena slowly turned in a circle. Oh my God! Nobody corrected her, because there wasn't anything else to say. Then they saw them, the sleepers, thousands of them, standing inside transparent chambers throughout the city. Humanoid, tall, perfectly motionless, covered in silver armor, unlike anything humanity had ever built. Sleeping, Kale approached one chamber carefully. The figure inside looked almost human. Almost, but not quite. The face appeared too symmetrical, too perfect, too calm, like a sculpture designed by someone who had only heard descriptions of humanity. Then the figure's eyes opened. Every light in the city activated simultaneously. The entire underground civilization came alive. Alarms echoed through endless corridors. Ancient systems awakened. Machines began moving for the first time in thousands of years. Above the planet, the giant living structure suddenly stopped attacking. Its attention shifted directly toward Arendor Prime. Commander Varn watched the sensor display change. The living vessel had detected something beneath the colony, something important, something ancient. Then the ancient voice returned one final time. This time it sounded different. For the first time, it sounded afraid. They must not awaken. Silence. On the bridge, nobody moved. Nobody spoke, because everyone understood the meaning immediately. The sleepers beneath Arendor Prime were not humanity's salvation. They were not allies. They were not rescuers. And whatever terrified a creature capable of destroying entire fleets was probably worse than the Krill. The Awakening War. Before we continue, comment below. The oldest enemy is usually the most dangerous, because tonight, humanity learns that some wars never truly end. That the eyes opened, that single moment changed everything. Deep beneath Arendor Prime, inside the ancient city hidden below the mines, thousands of sleeping figures remained motionless inside transparent chambers, except one, the figure staring directly at Kale. Awake, watching, aware, that nobody in the rescue team moved. Fear locked every muscle. Even breathing felt dangerous. The silver-armored being slowly turned its head, studying them, evaluating them, almost like a scientist examining insects. That, Lena whispered. Kale, he didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on the chamber, because the figure wasn't simply alive. It was intelligent, and intelligence could be far more terrifying than monsters. Then the chamber opened. A soft hiss echoed through the city. Blue mist drifted across the floor. The ancient being stepped forward, for the first time in thousands of years. Above the planet, the giant living vessel immediately changed course. Commander Elias Varn watched the sensor display in disbelief. The creature that had been effortlessly destroying Krill warships suddenly ignored them. Completely. Its attention focused entirely on the underground city. The remaining Krill ships noticed too, and something strange happened. They stopped retreating. Mira stared at the tactical data. Commander, what is it? The Krill fleet is reforming. Varn frowned. They're attacking again. Mira shook her head slowly. No, the bridge fell silent, because according to every sensor, the Krill weren't preparing to attack humanity. They were preparing to attack the city beneath Arendor Prime. That the realization hit hard. The giant living vessel feared the Sleepers. The Krill feared the Sleepers. And both sides were now moving toward the same target. That humanity had accidentally awakened something ancient enough to terrify everyone else. That back underground, the silver-armored figure finally spoke. Its voice echoed strangely through the chamber. Calm, precise, emotionless. That identification. That the words emerged in perfect English. Not translated. Perfect. That nobody answered immediately. Mostly because nobody knew how. Eventually, Kale stepped forward. Against all common sense. Against every survival instinct. That my name is Kale Arden. That the figure stared at him. Several seconds passed. Then it nodded slightly. That human. That Kale blinked. You know what we are? That the being answered immediately. That we created you. That silence, absolute silence. That nobody breathed. Nobody moved. Nobody even blinked. Because surely they had heard that wrong. That Kale stared at the figure. No. That the being tilted its head. That correction. A pause. Then. We created the conditions that allowed your species to exist. That wasn't much better. That the rescue team exchanged terrified looks. Nobody understood what was happening anymore. That the figure continued. That the war has returned. That then every light in the city suddenly turned red. That alarms activated. Ancient alarms, powerful enough to shake entire underground sectors. That something was approaching. Fast. The battle beneath the planet, far above Arendor Prime. The first Krill strike vessels entered the atmosphere. Not for harvest, not for conquest, for destruction. Commander Varn watched the trajectories. Every enemy ship targeted the exact location of the underground city. They're trying to destroy it. Nobody argued, because the evidence was obvious. Moments later, the giant living vessel descended as well. Massive shadows crossed the colony. Entire districts darkened beneath its enormous form. For the first time in recorded history, two ancient enemies had arrived at the same battlefield, and humanity stood directly between them. Deep underground, the silver-armored figure looked upward, as if it could somehow see through kilometers of stone. They found us. Kale frowned. Who? The answer came immediately. The last survivors of the Void War. Nobody understood what that meant, but they definitely didn't like the sound of it. Then the city awakened fully. Massive structures began moving. Ancient machines emerged from underground hangars. Energy flowed through systems that had slept for thousands of years. The city wasn't a city. It was a fortress. And it had just activated. The rescue team watched in disbelief as enormous defensive platforms rose from beneath the streets. Weapons larger than buildings emerged from hidden chambers. Energy shields expanded across entire districts. Kale looked around. What is this place? The silver-armored figure answered. The final stronghold. Outside, the first orbital strike hit. The impact shook the underground city violently. Dust rained from the ceiling. Energy shields flashed blue. Then another strike landed, and another, and another. The battle had begun, but this wasn't humanity's war. Not originally. This conflict had started thousands of years before Earth existed. Thousands of years before the first human looked at the stars. Thousands of years before recorded history. And now, humanity had stumbled directly into the middle of it. Suddenly, another armored figure awakened. Then another, then 10, then hundreds. Across the city, thousands of sleepers opened their eyes. Kale felt cold fear spread through his chest, because he realized something. One sleeper had been terrifying. Thousands might be unstoppable. Then the first awakened commander stepped forward. Unlike the others, its armor was black instead of silver. Ancient symbols glowed across its chest. Its presence alone felt overwhelming. The commander looked toward the surface, then toward the stars, then finally toward Kale, and smiled. It was the first genuine emotion any sleeper had shown. Unfortunately, it wasn't a friendly smile. The commander's voice echoed through the city. At last, a pause. Then, the galaxy is weak enough. every human in the chamber froze, because suddenly, the warning from the giant living vessel made perfect sense. The sleepers weren't hiding. They weren't surviving. They weren't waiting for rescue. They had been waiting for opportunity. And now, they were awake, far above Arendor Prime. Commander Elias Varn received one final transmission from the giant living vessel. The ancient voice sounded more urgent than ever before. Earth descendants, static crackled. Then the message continued. If the sleepers leave this world, a long pause, everything dies. Silence. The transmission ended. Commander Varn slowly looked toward Arendor Prime, toward the colony, toward the billions of lives that could depend on what happened next, and realized humanity faced an impossible choice. Help the creatures that terrified the Krill, or help the creatures that feared them. Either way, the future of the galaxy was about to change forever. Humanity's last choice. Before we begin the final chapter, comment below. Humanity chooses its own future, because tonight, one decision will determine the fate of the entire galaxy. Arendor Prime was dying. Above the planet, warships burned. Across the surface, entire districts shook under orbital bombardment. Deep underground, ancient machines awakened after sleeping for thousands of years. And standing in the center of it all, humanity was forced to choose. Commander Elias Varn stood on the bridge of the Ardent staring at the tactical display. Two ancient powers, two impossible enemies, two terrible choices. The Sleepers, creators of the ancient fortress hidden beneath the colony. A civilization powerful enough to frighten both the Krill and the giant living vessel. And the Entity, the colossal living structure drifting above the planet. A creature older than human history. A being capable of erasing warships from existence. Neither option felt safe. Neither option felt good. Mira finally broke the silence. Commander, Varn looked toward her. If we help the sleepers... She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Everyone understood. The black-armored commander had already revealed enough. The sleepers weren't heroes. They weren't victims. They were conquerors waiting for the galaxy to become weak enough to reclaim. And if we help the Entity? Another officer asked. Nobody knew. That answer was somehow worse. Deep beneath the colony, Kale Arden faced the same problem. The black-armored sleeper stood before him, surrounded by thousands of awakened warriors. Ancient soldiers, perfectly disciplined, perfectly calm, perfectly terrifying. The sleeper commander looked toward Kale, almost amused. You fear us? Kale answered honestly. Yes. The commander smiled again. A rational response. That wasn't comforting. Then the sleeper pointed toward a giant holographic display forming above the city. Stars appeared, galaxies, ancient battlefields, entire civilizations. The Entity lies. Images changed, showing worlds consumed by darkness. Dead systems, extinct species. It destroyed everything. Kale studied the images carefully. Something felt wrong. Not the images, the presentation. The commander wasn't explaining. He was persuading, manipulating, trying to win support. And suddenly Kale understood something important. Both sides wanted allies. Both sides wanted humanity. Because humans represented something neither ancient power possessed anymore. Choice. The frontier remembers. Above Arendor Prime, the battle reached its climax. The remaining Krill fleet launched everything. Every weapon, every fighter, every remaining ship. Not against humanity. Not against the colony. Against the sleepers. The sky exploded with fire. Meanwhile, the Entity descended lower. Massive tendrils stretching through the atmosphere, preparing for a final assault. The galaxy's oldest war was ending, one way or another. Aboard the Ardent, Commander Varn made his decision. Open a channel. Mira blinked. To who? Varn looked toward the tactical display, then answered. Everyone. Moments later, every receiver on Arendor Prime activated. Human, Krill, Sleeper, Entity. All of them heard the same message. This is Commander Elias Varn of humanity. The battlefield seemed to pause, just for a moment. Varn continued. For thousands of years you've been fighting the same war. Images of destruction filled the displays. Burning planets, dead civilizations, ruined stars. You all claim you're protecting the future. A pause. But everywhere you've gone. Another image appeared. Destroyed worlds, endless graves. The future disappears. Silence followed. Then Varn delivered the sentence that would be remembered across history. Humanity chooses a third option. Deep underground, Kale smiled, because he finally understood. Humanity wasn't powerful enough to defeat either side. But maybe they could stop both. The ancient fortress beneath Arendor Prime contained one final system, a defense protocol, a weapon created thousands of years ago. Not designed to destroy enemies. Designed to imprison them. Forever. The Sleepers had built it during the original war, then hidden themselves inside it, waiting, sleeping, planning. Now humanity intended to use it against everyone. The entity, the Sleepers, even the remaining Krill. No winners, no conquerors, no empire. Just an end. Kale raced through the fortress with Lena and the surviving colonists. Behind them, Sleeper soldiers advanced rapidly. Ahead of them, the control chamber waited. Alarms echoed everywhere. Explosions shook the city. The war was collapsing around them. Finally, they reached the chamber. A massive circular room, ancient controls, a single activation platform. Kale knew what it meant immediately. Someone had to stay behind. Someone had to trigger it manually. Lena realized too. No. Kale smiled sadly. Somebody has to. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Lena hugged him tightly. The way people do when words stop working. Above the planet, Commander Varn watched the tactical display. The entity understood. So did the Sleepers. Both sides immediately moved toward the fortress, trying to stop the activation. Too late. Kale placed his hand on the platform. The ancient system activated. Across Arendor Prime, energy erupted from the underground city. Massive rings of blue light expanded into orbit. Through the atmosphere, across space. The entity tried to escape. The Sleepers tried to flee. The surviving Krill vessels accelerated away. None were fast enough. The prison activated. Light consumed everything. And then, silence. 3 months later. The war was over. The entity was gone. The Sleepers were gone. The Krill fleet had vanished. Arendor Prime still existed. Damaged, scarred, but alive. Historians would later call it the day humanity refused the throne. Because every other civilization had tried to rule the galaxy, conquer it, control it, own it. Humanity chose something different. Freedom. Commander Elias Varn survived. Lena survived. Thousands of colonists survived. Kale Arden did not. But throughout the frontier, stories spread. Stories about an ordinary maintenance worker who stood between ancient gods and refused to kneel. Years later, children would ask whether the story was true, and their parents would always answer the same way. Maybe, then they'd smile. That's the thing about humanity. We don't need to be the strongest. We just need to refuse surrender. And somewhere beyond known space, in a place no human had ever seen, a single blue light quietly opened. Watching, waiting, the end. HYF Sci-Fi. More stories await beyond the stars. Before you leave, I want to ask you something. If you were standing where Kale stood, knowing the odds were impossible, would you have stayed and fought? Or would you have walked away? What would you choose if the future of others depended on your courage? Stories like this aren't really about spaceships, aliens, or distant worlds. They're about us, because every one of us faces battles in real life. Moments when giving up seems easier than moving forward. Moments when fear tells us to quit. But here's another question. What if your greatest success is waiting just beyond the challenge you're facing right now? The people who change their lives aren't always the smartest or the strongest. They're the ones who keep going when everyone else stops. So tell me in the comments, what's one challenge you've overcome that made you stronger? I'd genuinely love to read your answers. And if you enjoyed this adventure, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to HYF Sci-Fi. Every like, every comment, and every subscription helps us create more epic journeys across the stars. Thanks for watching. If you love epic sci-fi stories and unforgettable adventures, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to HYF Sci-Fi. Join our growing community, and we'll see you in the next journey beyond the stars.